You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello. Good start. Hello and welcome to season 11 of the Writing Community Chat Show. I can't quite believe we are in season 11. And it's a special occasion because we're celebrating our 3rd year birthday, which is also kind of crazy. So officially, we're in our toddler phase, although we won't be throwing tantrums or scribbling on the walls just yet, unless you give us good reason to do so. Hello to you all in the chat. It's fantastic to see you here. You might have noticed I am sat here on my own right now, and that is a big, big shame tonight because obviously we're celebrating our birthday. We've got a great guest on for you guys. Not my birthday, the show's birthday. Right, Chris has got some internet issues and he can't get on the show right now. He might be able to join us, but at the moment he is not. So I apologize for that, but we're gonna have a great show anyway. For 3 years now, this show has been going, and we've been bringing you interviews full of insight and writing advice from fantastic authors, indie and otherwise, to help you on your writing journey. And we really hope that we have in some way, and it's benefited you guys. We have loved you as part of the community, so just for that alone has been fantastic. Tonight is no exception. We've got another fantastic guest, and season 11 has got some incredible guests lined up as well already, and that is looking very, very good. Please let us know how you were doing in the chat. It's been great. It's been quite a while since we've done a show. It's the longest break we've had since the start of the show. It's been about 3 or 4 weeks, so it's really nice to see you in the chat again. It's nice to connect with you guys, and thank you. If you remember last year, we had the magician PT grace us with his presence for the show and do a show birthday, so I will play a little clip from that just for you guys to remember how that went, because it was quite funny, and some of the audience that watches this show were on that featured show. So here we go. Let's watch this.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to mark the card, right? And just so you know that I don't have a duplicate of it, because I could otherwise have another pack of cards on me with a duplicate, of each card, right? Let's put a random word on it. In fact, imagine we're at a zoo or on a farm or something. Someone give me an animal, any kind of animal.
Manatee.
Wow. Okay. Perfect. Manatee. That's the big. That's that big fat guy, isn't it? They're like Yeah, I know the guys. They live in the water. Those things. So manatee, right? Yeah. Okay. So we have a pretty, I would say, distinctive, recognizable marked card, right? Which is good. I'm going to stand up for this so you can really clearly see what's going on. But here's the game. We're going to play Follow the Manatee, right? So here's how that works. If I stand up, okay, there it is, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's going to start. That's about halfway in, roughly in the middle. And my job is to bring it up to the top. So this card here is the manatee. Okay. Let me show you that again, because that was quite quick, right? So we've got the 5 of spades with the manatee. It's going to start in about the middle. My job is to bring it back up to the top. So this card.
Wow.
So we could just keep doing that.
So there you go. Fantastic show last year for the birthday. That is there to watch back. And it was really, really cool because we didn't just see the magic as well. We learned about kind of the whole tradition and how that works. And it was very interesting for someone who wasn't massively into magic growing up, but I really enjoyed that. Very, very good indeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me get on tonight's guest, and we're going to have a great time. Please, if you've got questions, send them in throughout. If you want to save them up to the end where the question segment is, by all means, do so by all means. But let's get them on. So tonight's guest is an award-winning comedian, author, actress, and broadcaster who's making waves in the entertainment industry. You might have seen her on ITV's Loose Women, Sky News, and the Netflix's Crown, The Crown. But that's not all. Samantha is also the host of the popular podcast, The Divorce Social. which is a Times podcast of the week, and it was #1 in the relationship podcast and iTunes charts, which is fantastic. She is a deaf activist. As a hearing aid wearer herself, she is the author of critically acclaimed children's books with deaf main characters, which is fantastic, and the new non-fiction book Living with Hearing Loss and Deafness, which you can see up in that top corner there. The link to that is in the description of the video and the podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Samantha Baines. Hello, Samantha.
Hello. I have no magic for you. I'm so sorry.
Do not worry about that at all. It's magic you being here. Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I hope you're doing well.
I am. I'm good. I've had a busy day. I had 3 glasses of Prosecco around lunchtime, so I'm due for a nap. But apart from that...
Prosecco at lunchtime sounds like a fantastic thing to do. Day drinking as we get older is a great thing. Yeah, so is that a celebration? Was there something good going on there?
Well, I was actually signing copies of my book at an
Nice.
audiologist. Like, it was like the opening. It's my audiologist. He's moved to Whitstable. It's called Whitstable Hearing. And he had like an opening day and he wanted me to come along and sign copies of my children's book. And then he just kept plying me with Prosecco. And I was like, this is the best book signing I've ever been to. They don't normally do this.
That is quite unique, isn't it? Because I went to Cardiff Waterstones a couple of weeks back and there was an author in there and there was people lined up, but they didn't seem to have any kind of Prosecco going on there.
No Prosecco normally. And especially in children's books. You're not normally drunk at events. So I think this should be a new thing.
Yeah. And definitely going for a nap after having a drink sounds about right as well.
Yeah.
But not right now because it's Friday evening and it's season 11. So this is really cool to be starting season 11 with you, Samantha, because you have a lot of talent in a lot of areas and it can be very cool to dive into all of that. From the podcasting to writing fiction and non-fiction and children's books, and being a broadcaster. So there's a lot to dig into and we'll get into that very shortly. But whereabouts in the world are you coming from?
I'm in Kent. So not Whitstable, but still Kent.
And like where Chris is, how is the weather with you?
Well, it hailed for a brief moment on my journey home today, but then there was a rainbow, but it was cold and rainy, sadly. And I assumed, that in March it might be warmer. So I wasn't wearing enough clothes for the rain, hail, rainbow scenario.
Yeah, I definitely saw in the news today that they're expecting a frosty start to next week, which is not what I wanted to see towards the end of March at all.
It's my birthday month as well. And the weather has varied. So sometimes I have like an outdoor birthday and other times it's like terrible. It snowed before in my birthday on March.
A crazy time. Okay, so we're going to play a little video and get into part 1 of the show, which is called The Road to Writing. So Samantha, let us all know, how did you start writing? At what point of your life was that? And what kind of were the inspirations behind it all?
Well, I started writing when I was quite young, actually. And I remember at school, you do like creative writing classes. And one of my stories got picked and the teacher put it on the board. And I was like, this is my proudest moment. And my mum was like, you're going to be an author one day. And I sort of always assumed that I could never be an author because authors were like really posh white men with white hair, and that wasn't me, and I'd never sort of seen really an author, this mysterious being, like being interviewed. And I remember discovering Jacqueline Wilson books when I was younger, and I was like, oh, a woman has written books and there's a little girl in it like me. So that was a very exciting thing that I came to. And then the reason I actually started writing and published my first book is because I'm deaf. I have a hearing aid and I wear in one ear, and I'm ambassador for RNID, which is a deaf charity. And I started doing work with RNID as a kind of way for me to come to terms with this new diagnosis that I got, because I only discovered I was deaf 6 years ago now. But it was actually started, when I was much younger, but I just never assumed that I would become deaf or have any sort of hearing loss. So I never went for a hearing test or anything. And it was only when I got a type of tinnitus and went to the GP that she sent me for the hearing test, and I discovered it. So it was all a big shock. And I started working with the charity as kind of a way to try and help and start processing things. And I was talking about it at the time in my stand-up. And it was interesting. I started meeting deaf people and families of deaf children, and they would always ask me if I could recommend anything, like a TV show or a book with deaf characters. And I suddenly realized that in my life, I'd never written a book. I'd never read a book. I'd never written a book either by that point. That's the Prosecco coming in. But I'd never read a book with a deaf main character. And I'd never read a book with any deaf character, like even that they meet in passing. There are those books out there, but I hadn't read any of them at that point. And I sort of thought, oh, hang on, I wonder if I could do something. I'd been writing a little bit for TV, but it hadn't been going very well, and I've been trying to get stuff commissioned, and it was like jumping through hurdles. So I was writing, and I was doing journalism and writing articles, and obviously writing my stand-up. And I thought, wow, maybe I could try and write a book. But originally I wanted to write this book, Living with Hearing Loss and Deafness. But there sort of wasn't an interest for it at the time, because I thought non-fiction, that'll be straightforward because it's a follow-on from my stand-up comedy. So maybe that will be the easiest for me to do. And then I met an amazing children's publisher called Knights Of, and they kind of got me really excited about the world of children's books. And I came up with an idea and wrote it.
It's amazing. It must have been a very confusing time in your life to have grown up without that, aware of that condition, and then to be able to, I'm assuming, judging your character very quickly, that you may have used that in your comedy as well. Did you kind of go down that route? Yeah. So writing then into kind of where we are now with a non-fiction novel, people get kind of, they struggle with that battle of putting themselves on the page, but you presumably have already done that on the stage, which must be even harder.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when I started stand-up comedy, the feedback I would always get is that I wasn't talking about myself enough. So I wasn't using my own experiences in stand-up enough, because I wanted to talk about the world around me and like interesting. I used to do, my first show was about science and astronauts and going into space, because I love all that stuff. So I'd always get the feedback, oh, we want to hear more about you, we wanted you to talk about you. So that was a journey in my stand-up that I guess I'd got to. I don't do stand-up comedy live anymore, and that's for reasons to do with being deaf and sound sensitivity, and it's a really overwhelming environment sound wise. Like actually saying the words into a mic are great because everyone has to listen to me and no one else is really talking generally at that point, and it means I don't hear hecklers, so that's fine. But the whole like traveling to and from and the atmosphere that gigs are normally at, which is a nice atmosphere, is loud. So I don't do that anymore. But I did do stand-up for 7 years, and I do think that was kind of my training in not only comedy, but bringing myself to the page and storytelling and how to tell a story. So in some ways, it was easier for me to write the non-fiction than it was for me to write my 2 children's books, which are fiction.
Yeah. How did you have to make an adjustment to write the children's books, or did you find that kind of a natural process?
Yeah, I think it was interesting because I'm an actor, I love getting into character.
Yeah.
So that was something that I found really fun about writing fiction. And initially I wrote my first book. I've got it on hand. Ooh.
Yes.
I wrote my first book, Harriet Versus the Galaxy. I wrote it as this sort of narrator character, a little bit like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because as I said, I love space and comedy. So I did this kind of narrator's voice, and it was actually part of the process of then I decided I'm going to write this as the character of Harriet. and I was working with the publisher at the time, and then as soon as I did that, it started flowing because I could really get into the head of the character, and I think that's where kind of acting me came out. And actually, my second book isn't written in the first person because I wanted to challenge myself. But yeah, that's definitely when the story started flowing for me for the first book, is when I started writing it as Harriet.
So I'm interested to know that, as someone who delivered stand-up comedy, which must be a very nerve-wracking thing, and you get instant feedback and acknowledgement of your content. How did you feel then writing children's books? Did you feel any different to kind of when that was released? How did you feel about being judged in that sense?
It's really funny. My family got really annoyed with me when I first wrote the book because I constantly wanted to read it to them to see what they thought, because the comedian in me is like, I want to go to a gig and try out the jokes and see the reaction. So when I started writing the book, I was like, I want to read a bit to someone and see what they think, or like what bits they laugh at, or what characters they're particularly drawn to. And I was married at the time. I'm divorced now, hence the podcast. But at the time, my ex had a stepsister who was very young. She was about 6, I think, at the time, or maybe 5. And luckily she let me read to her so I could kind of test out my material on her. And yeah, luckily she liked the book, and she really liked the character of Sock Muncher in my first book. So it's about Harriet, and Harriet has a hearing aid. Harriet Versus the Galaxy is the name of the book. Harriet has a hearing aid, and her hearing aid translates alien languages, and she discovers that she's part of Earth's first line of defense, the SAS, secret astronaut spies, to protect the Earth from aliens, and so is her gran. So Sock Muncher is an alien who eats socks. That's where all the socks disappear to. But Sock Muncher is a nice alien, and he kind of becomes Harriet's sidekick and like pet / best friend. And so it was really nice reading it to my ex's stepsister, because she started to love that character of Sock Muncher, and that kind of helped me realize that I could bring out the character a little bit more and make Sock Muncher a bit more lovable.
Yeah, Sock Muncher is a great name and completely makes sense to most people's lives, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's the Munchers are the aliens from the book who are invading, and the rest of the Munchers aren't very nice, but Sock Muncher is nice. And it turns out that Sock Muncher isn't a muncher, he's an eater, which is a different thing. But there's Pen Muncher, obviously all the pens, Sock Muncher, like every Sweater Muncher. There's even Knicker Muncher, if you've ever lost some knickers. And at one point, Knicker Muncher eats Gran's knickers from off her bottom.
Wow.
Which is quite shocking for Gran.
Yes, it is.
So I got to, it was also really fun just doing comedy that wasn't like, I mean, I've always loved scatological comedy, because it's silly and fun, and I've always loved to be silly in my comedy. And you know, when you're doing shows and getting reviewed on them and people are like, oh, she made too many puns, you know, I was actually the first woman in the UK pun championship final ever. Wow. Which was like in 2017. I was like, what? We love puns.
Can we challenge the audience to kind of give us their best creative puns right now?
Let's do it.
What advice
should we give a theme? We should give a theme. Yeah. It can't just be any old pun. And you can't use a pun that you haven't written. You have to write your own pun. I think the theme should be science, space.
So an original space pun from the audience. Guys, get your writing fingers going. Samantha, what tips do you have for someone to write a pun?
I don't know if there are many tips. I mean, the main thing I used to do was, because puns weren't like my main thing, but I do love a pun. So my thing I used to do was like take a subject and then do a little spider diagram of words to do with the subject and like brainstorm, and then that'll give you ideas, because obviously a pun is a double meaning. So straight away there are some words that have double meanings anyway, but then you can also take a word that sounds a little bit like another word and use it that way. Or what is brilliant, and I've only managed to do it a few times, is to come up with a pun that includes 2 puns within the pun.
I like it.
One of my favorite ones that I've ever written, which I did at the UK Pun Championships and didn't win, was that I'm trying to convince my partner that we should get a dog, and I'm doing it subliminally through the wallpaper. I'm not going to lie, I've got an all terrier motif.
Fantastic.
Right?
Yeah.
So I was proud of that one.
Yeah.
So just brainstorming, and also have fun with it. Silly. To be silly.
There's a couple of things coming in. Brandon says, why did the astronaut break up with his girlfriend? Because he needed space.
Nice. Yeah. But also, how do we know that the astronaut is a man? You know, you could have been more feminist with that, Brandon. I'm not going to lie. I love your effort.
He's not saying it is a man.
he put his.
Oh, he did. I'll take that back.
There are some great female astronauts out there, but I appreciate the effort. But I have to bring the woman into it, please. Thank you.
Why couldn't the aliens hear inside my Roomba?
Oh, I see. So okay. So this is a good example of when you're coming up with puns. So that's a great joke, but you need inside knowledge for that joke, which is the next comment, which is sound doesn't travel in a vacuum.
Correct.
So that's it. That's quite a, like, what we call in the comedy world a Radio 4 joke, because it needs a little bit of knowledge to get it, and then the Radio 4 audience would be like, and other people would be like, what? So I love what you've done there. What you could do to make sure that everyone gets it is bring up the vacuum thing earlier in the joke. So not point to it too much, but say, you know, sound doesn't travel in a vacuum, so that's why aliens can't hear inside my Roomba, or something.
Right. Great stuff. Brandon's got another one. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything, even space.
Nice. I like it. You've done well there, and it's non-gendered, so I appreciate that, Brandon. Thank you.
He's pulled himself back there. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. So the writing journey has gone from you've always been involved in writing, as you mentioned, in some kind of way or the other, and you got into children's books, and you had 2 of them published. What was your thought process at that point? Were you thinking more children's books? Why perhaps did you kind of go down the non-fictional route at that point?
Yeah, I think I love that someone's just commented they can only think of dirty puns, and I have to say that is a person after my own heart, because my shows used to be full of dirty puns. Not my children's books, obviously. More like poo puns. So the question, children's books. So because I ended up writing children's books sort of by accident, which is, to be honest, a lot of how my career has happened is sort of by accident. I've become a deaf activist now, but I call myself an accidental activist, because I never meant to like start campaigning for stuff. I just ended up accidentally doing it. So because I never sort of planned to write children's books, and then did, and was like, this is great, I like this, because I can be silly and creative, and I don't have to do any research or work in any facts, because I can just create a whole new world, and that appeals to me. I kept going back to this idea, which was the first book I ever wanted to write, which was the book I wanted to read when I discovered I was deaf and had hearing loss. I actually went to the library and searched online for a book that would give me all the information I needed, because, you know, you go to the audiologist, they show you a graph and say, you have hearing loss. We think you'd benefit from wearing a hearing aid. And you're like, it was like a jaw on the floor, rabbit in the headlights moment for me. And then they sort of give you a leaflet which has lots of grey-haired people on that look like they're going to a retirement village. And listen, nothing against those people, love you all, but that wasn't me. And then I was told that I needed to come in for a hearing aid fitting, and sort of everything started happening quite quickly. And I just wanted someone almost to like sit me down and be like, this is what you can call yourself deaf now. You're allowed, even though you don't speak with British Sign Language as your first language, and you can't hear silence, which is actually a very rare thing for deaf people to hear complete silence. You know, a lot of people can hear kind of like a slamming of a door. They'd hear that muffled, for example. And I didn't know any of this information. I didn't know what being deaf meant for my life, and if that would mean I couldn't be on the radio anymore, and could I still work? And, you know, no one told me that I could get a disabled person's rail card from being deaf, which means I get a third off travel, which is important information. So I kept coming back to this idea for a book because it had been the first one I wanted to write, and the one I felt that I needed back then. And so I just wanted something to be out there for those people who, like me, are like, what is this new world of deafness and disability? And am I allowed to say I'm disabled because I'm deaf? And, you know, can you have sex with your hearing aids on? And these are genuinely all questions I answer in the book. So
fantastic.
So for me, it wasn't really, oh, now I'm going to segue into nonfiction.
Yeah.
It was just like, this is the book I just have to write. Like, I just need to get this one out of the way. And then I feel like I'm going to go back to children's books and have a nice time. But it was definitely like birthing someone, writing Living with Hearing Loss and Deafness. Like, hopefully, I've never birthed anyone yet, but I feel like you hear about childbirth that you forget about the pain of it, and that's why you do it again. And I feel like that about non-fiction books.
Amazing. Yeah, great comment. I mean, I imagine with this kind of work that you've done, you'll get a lot of communication from readers. Has that happened a lot?
Yeah. And that's one of the amazing things, and one of my favorite things to do is to go into schools and talk to children about books, and also especially schools that have like maybe a deaf department, or they have a couple of children who have hearing aids. And quite often, like, you know, teachers will buy one of my books and then get the class to read it together to make children with hearing aids feel more included, and then they'll all learn about hearing aids and deafness. And that's honestly like the best thing. I mean, in my career, you know, you mentioned before, I've done a few things, you know. I hosted Magic Mike with Channing Tatum, which people always ask me about. Yes, he does smell nice. And, you know, I've done some things that on paper look super like impressive and cool, but actually going and, there I am with the fellas. I'm
gonna save this for later and ask about the picture, but you've already mentioned it now. We can't sweep that under the carpet. I mean, come on.
It's a promo shot, but that is basically what the show was like. It was me fully clothed, and 14 semi-naked professional dancers doing dance moves. And Channing Tatum directed it, and, you know, I worked with him in LA on the script, and it was super fun. But like on paper, people would be like, well, surely that's your career highlight. But actually, talking to children with hearing aids in school and showing them my hearing aid, and then being like, what color's yours? And just them being amazed that there's like an author with a hearing aid feels like the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah, that's incredible. It really is. I mean, let's talk about some of your career then, in other things than writing. I mean, you've appeared on a lot of TV shows, and you've been on the radio, and you've been podcasting. Is there kind of something that you're more fond of over other things?
Yeah, I guess I started out as an actor. So I studied drama at Exeter University. I was in the National Youth Theatre when I was younger, and then I went to drama school, Central School of Speech and Drama. So I feel like at my heart, I will always be an actor, because that's kind of how I started. But that's kind of, it's interesting because people often ask me this question, like, what's your favorite thing to do? And I'm like, why do I have to pick one? I
Yeah.
want to do them all. And also I think they all feed into each other, you know. So I'm surprised that more people don't have a, you know, catalog career, as I call it. But yeah, I love doing everything. And also I have ADHD. So, and it's something I've recently discovered, and I'm doing that whole like referral process at the moment to get it officially written on a certificate. I imagine it's a certificate. I don't know what they give you. They're like, congratulations, you have ADHD, and then I'll put it on the wall. But it, since I've discovered that, it like totally makes sense with all the different things I do, because I just like being creative, and you know, that comes out in different ways, whether it's writing things down or saying things on the radio or acting things that other people have written, you know. So I think I'll always be an actor at my heart, but definitely books is not something that's going away. I do love writing books.
It's interesting with ADHD. I was watching something a couple of months back, and they were talking about women discovering that they've got ADHD. And there's quite a similar thing with your kind of the route that you went down with the learning process of your deafness or your hearing aid, that there's a lot of women out there that think they might have it, but don't know where to go and where to get advice from. Have you got any advice for someone who think they might have ADHD?
Yeah, so it's so interesting because when I was younger, I think a lot of the what I was taught about ADHD were a lot of the symptoms that young boys tend to get. And it's now like studies have shown that young girls have slightly differing symptoms, if we want to call them symptoms, because like, it's, you know, I don't like to think of it as a disease, but you know, the way that we show that we have ADHD is different. So so for me, time blindness is a huge thing, and also incredible because now I can tell all my friends that it's my ADHD, so it's not my fault that I've just like been really late and missed stuff. But you know, like I've turned up in the wrong month to stuff, and I've, you know, in the morning, I know that I have something at 5 p.m. and I've set 2 reminders on my phone and on my Alexa, and I've still just not gone. And there's not even like a reason. Like, it's just like my brain has like erased that from my brain calendar. But actually, for me, it was following people on Instagram. So following people who have ADHD, or some people prefer to call themselves neurodiverse or neurodivergent, as someone's mentioned in the comments, you know, following all these creators on Instagram and hearing from them what they experience and the way they view the world and the way they interact with the world made me go, oh, hang on a second, there's a lot of this that is resonating. And then I started to do my own research, and then I went to my GP. So the thing to do if you want to get your official diagnosis is you can go to your GP. Your GP will have a chat with you, and you will explain your symptoms, as we put it medically. And then they'll give you a form to fill out. And if you tick enough boxes in the right category of the form, they'll refer you to a psychologist. So you have to sit down with a psychologist slash psychiatrist to get an official diagnosis. But the waiting list at the moment is like a year. But
wow.
You can ask your GP, instead of referring you through the local NHS system, you can ask that they refer you to Psychiatry UK, which is a kind of body that does it. So rather than depending on your local NHS service, you can go through that way. And I've been advised that that's a good thing to do, but I haven't experienced it yet, so I can't give you my review. But that's
Fantastic.
the way to do it.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice for people who are going through that at the moment. Just before we move on to the next part of the show, I'd like to know what tips you can give someone that wants to go down the children's book writing path, and interested about how you kind of got around the illustration part of that. Did you draw it yourself, or has that been outsourced?
No, so a lot of the time with picture books, so those would be for like 6 and under generally. They're obviously much shorter, and there's less physical words on page, and it's actually incredibly hard to write a picture book and get the story in such a few amount of words and like personality across and jokes. Like, it's such an amazing skill, which I do not have. But generally with picture books, the illustration kind of takes more of a role earlier on. Whereas with my book, so Harriet Versus the Galaxy and also The Night the Moon Went Out, I wrote the book first, and then the book, signed the book deal, and then we looked at getting an illustrator on board based on the story that was already there that I'd written. So I was really lucky that I've been able to work with deaf illustrators and kind of, not put my foot down, because the publishers I've worked with were very happy for that. But I've sort of said, please, can I have a deaf illustrator? So Lucy Rogers, who illustrated my second book, I met her on Twitter just through like tweeting about being deaf. And then I saw her on like a hashtag and I was like, hello, I write books and you create amazing illustrations. So, and that's one of the most fun things as well, I think, about children's books, is working with someone else and then they suddenly, illustrate all these ideas that you've had. And quite often the images they create are very different to what I had in my head, but that's what I love. For my for Harriet Versus the Galaxy, there's a different illustrator did the front cover, Ella Masters, who I was a big fan of on Instagram. And then inside is illustrated by Jessica Marie Flores, who is deaf and is in the US. And all the planets that she created and the aliens she drew, she took what I described them as, but like added extra. So there's like a squirrel, there's planet Autumn, which squirrels live on. And they always wear a light scarf just in case. So she drew them with like one eye and like a bit of an antenna. And I was like, I love that. So that's been a really fun process. There have been a few moments that I've had to be like, actually, this character is like this, so can we make them look a bit older or whatever? And there are some things I say, like, I like to have characters with lots of different body types. So even if I haven't described that in the book, because I don't always like to describe, especially women, because I've been described a lot based on what I look like. I don't always like to describe people's bodies with characters in my books, but I do like to say to the illustrator, like, I'd love Gran to be a bit of a curvy Gran, And so there are some things I've said, but other than that, I'm like, let loose, show me whatever you think.
No, that's amazing, and it sounds like a really enjoyable process. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, let's do part 2 of the show, because time is pressing on and we want to make sure we got time for the questions at the end. Part 2 is what's the story, and we learn about your new book that's out next month. So let's play the video and we'll get onto it. So part 2, what's the story? We've kind of touched on a lot of it already, but could you let someone know that might not know about this book, what is Living with Hearing Loss and Deafness all about, please?
So this is the book, although disclaimer, this isn't actually the book. This is someone else's book with my cover stuck on, because I had to do that for the promo shoot because the book wasn't printed yet.
That's amazing.
But behind the scenes, glamour. So Living with Hearing Loss and Deafness, A Guide to Owning It and Loving It, is it's a guide into the world of hearing loss and deafness. So whether you've just discovered that you need a hearing aid and that you have hearing loss, or you've met a new partner and they're deaf, or someone in your family is deaf and you want to find out more about their world and the ways that you can help them, or someone in your job or school or whatever is deaf. So this is a book with lots of facts. So much research, lots of facts. I've also interviewed a lot of other deaf people about their experiences, and audiologists and people who work for deaf charities. And so lots of experts in there as well for their opinions. And then also there's just some silly stories from me of like actually what it's like, getting divorced and sleeping with people for the first time and having to tell them at some point that not only are you divorced, you're also deaf and you wear a hearing aid. So it's like, do you want to pop off your socks and I'll pop out my hearing aid in the bedroom? And one time I did leave my hearing aid on someone's bedside table and leave their house, and then have to message them and say, please, could you bring my hearing aid to Soho because I need it. So, there's silly stuff like that. And then there's also me explaining what it was like when I was told that I had hearing loss, and I was very shocked and I felt very different and other, and like there was no one like me. I was 29. I got my hearing aid when I was 30. It's like 6 years ago now. I felt like no one is 30 and has a hearing aid. There's something wrong with me. I'm old before my time. And I don't think any of those things now, but I do kind of describe my journey with it in the book as well. And hopefully people who are going through that can relate to it. So it's kind of a like guide all book for anyone who wants to find out more about being deaf aware and terminology, and whether you can have sex with your hearing aid on and all of that. And also hopefully it's a kind of resource for people who are deaf and want to feel seen. If someone's been deaf from birth and it really integrated in the deaf community and deaf culture, they'll probably know a lot of it, but hopefully it'll be nice for them to read along and be like, yeah, I'm glad this is finally in a book. But yeah, so I've tried to, it's obviously a lot of based around my own experience, but I've tried to interview a lot of other people to represent a lot of different deaf experiences, because there's so many kind of different ways to be deaf. It's not just one thing. And quite often we see, the baby being given a hearing aid for the first time and crying on YouTube. And actually, that might be lovely, but they might be crying because when you get a hearing aid for the first time, it's really overwhelming and suddenly you can hear everything. So, yes, it's lovely to hear your mother's voice for the first time, but also I was in a bathroom and I thought it was taking off because someone used a hand dryer. And I know that sounds like a joke, but I genuinely squatted down and held onto the toilet in the loo the first time I got my hearing aid, and I cried in Westfield Shopping Centre because I was so overwhelmed. So, there's kind of a lot to reveal to people. We're not just the baby on YouTube, and we're not just granddad at Christmas hasn't turned his hearing aid on. There's a lot in the middle, and those two things still exist, but there's a lot in the middle as well. So hopefully I guess my aim is just to like try and help representation a bit and help people feel less alone. And so if I do that, it might be a terribly written book, but if I do make people feel less alone, then I am happy.
Fantastic. It sounds like a wonderful mixture of facts and life experience, which is something that's really valuable, because sometimes when you're reading nonfiction, you just get bombarded with facts and facts and facts, and suddenly you kind of lost interest. But with that good mix of life experience in there from someone who's been there and done it, that really makes a great connection for someone who's going through that the first time. I think that's wonderful. A lot of love for that in the chat. Halo says it sounds like a I can't say that word. Phenomenal.
Yeah. Thank you.
And you asked, is this book available in the US?
Not at the moment, no, because it is quite, and the reason for that is you could order it in the UK and get it sent over, but the reason is it is quite UK focused, because there's like being deaf at work chapter, and it talks about the sort of benefits that you can get through the UK government, and benefits you can get and the ways you can deal with transport in the UK and how the NHS works with hearing aids and stuff like that. So it does have to be quite UK focused to give specific advice to actually help people on a practical level. But there are really good books in the US written by American deaf people who also use American Sign Language, because in the UK we use British Sign Language, which is BSL. In America they use ASL. So Niall DeMarco is, you might know him, he's a model. He won it's Strictly Come Dancing in America. America's Got Talent is the other one, but he's written a book called Deaf Utopia. And then Marlee Matlin is a deaf actress who was in the film Coda, which you might have seen. I interviewed her about that. She's lovely. She's written a book. It's like a biography about her life. So both of those are available in the US.
Fantastic. Really good. And you also said this book is so important. My cousin lost her hearing after about of meningitis when she was 2, and she's worn hearing aids since. She's 30 and awesomely fierce. Awareness would make her life easier. It really is, like, just for me, who's been kind of outside of the world of deafness, to hear that there's multiple different ways to be deaf is kind of awakening to me as well. So it's really good to kind of spread that awareness. And as you mentioned, using this book, even if you know somebody that's got that hearing deafness or someone in your family, I think that would be a really valuable book to get. And the link is in the description below, which is out in the UK next month, I believe.
Yeah, 27th of April, but it's available to pre-order now.
Yes, pre-order right now. Also, we're going to go on to the part 3 of the show because we've got just over 15 minutes left. So if you've got questions for Samantha or for me about the show or for any of us about life in general, whatever, now is the time to start putting those questions in the chat, and we will get to them after I ask a couple of community questions. Part 3 coming up. My first one was going to be, are there any particular rewarding experiences you've had as an advocate for those with hearing loss? But you've already discussed that one. Which
any
was,
particular what? Sorry.
Rewarding experiences.
Rewarding.
Yes.
I didn't hear what you said. I was like, I heard rewarding. And I was like, what is that? Is that a writing term that I'm not aware of?
No. So looking back on the process of your writing and getting through publishing this book, firstly, was it massively different from releasing your children's books, and would you have done anything differently?
I think, yes, it was quite different. I think my first children's book, Harriet Versus the Galaxy, was just over like 20,000 words, and this book is over 80,000. So, I mean, straight away, it's different because it's like 4 times of book more. Also, it was very different because in some ways it felt less creative, and in some ways it felt more creative. So it felt less creative because I couldn't create my own world and my own characters and draw you in. And I had to like go off facts and research and people's interviews. But then it also felt more creative, or maybe more of a creative challenge, because I was trying to bring something to the book that wasn't just bombarding people with facts, because I love a nonfiction book, but they can feel quite like dense. And sometimes I've had to like reread pages because there's a lot of information. So I sort of had to be quite creative with the ways that I sort of fed out that information, and also weaved in some personal stories and some little jokes and stuff. So it was a very different experience because of all the research, and actually I write quite quickly. So with the children's books, I've written the whole children's book before I signed the deal that, this is going to be made into a book. With nonfiction, you normally write a pitch. So writing the pitch document for the book was also a new experience. And I've written pitches a lot in kind of the telly world and the radio world. but being quite detailed about what each chapter was going to contain before I'd written it is quite stressful because I was like, I don't know, I might think of something else when I'm writing it, and I did. But it's also been an interesting way of working, and I've tried to apply it to my children's book that I'm writing at the moment, was to write out a proper plan, because I'm not really a planner. I'm like, come up with the characters and the story in my head, and then I go for it. So
pantster.
Yeah. That's 100% me. So this was like the complete other end, because I had to plan to get the book commissioned. So that was very interesting. And I think I resisted that process more. So I think if I went back, I'd try and lean in a little bit more to the planning. But I was like, no, I don't want to put that down, because then I might change my mind. And actually, you are allowed to change your mind during the process. But I was like, if it's on paper, then I have to do it. So, and also, as I was saying, I'm quite a fast writer. So I was given 2.5 months to write the book. And if I was writing a fiction, that would have been fine. But because of all the interviews I was doing and the research, you know, contacting someone saying, can I interview you for my book? And then there's saying yes. And then you working out a time, or even just emailing them questions and them not replying, and then you chasing them, takes such a long time. And so I couldn't write a lot of the book until I had all that information. So towards the end, towards my deadline, I was doing like 2,000 words a day, 6 days a week to try and get it done. So I would have asked for more time as well, I think, if I did it again.
Fantastic. Brilliant. If you could take these are our tricky questions now, okay?
Okay.
If you could take any character from the world of fiction, whether that be books, TV, whatever, and put one of those characters into your book series, whether it's your children's books or anything else you might write, what character would you take and why?
You said this is a tricky question, but as soon as you asked it, I was like, I know. Cruella de Vil.
Fantastic.
She's just an incredible character.
Yeah.
And from 101 Dalmatians. And I love that she's fashionable and ruthless and wants to kill animals, which is awful. But yet I really relate to her in some way. So I think she's just a great villain. So I'd love to have her in a villain, especially in a Harriet book. I feel like we could do some fun stuff with aliens that look like Dalmatians or something.
That sounds really good. That's one of the best answers I think we've had for that in recent times. If you could take the ending from anything, again, down the fictional route, whether it's books or TV or film, what ending are you going to change and why?
If I could change the ending or take it and put it into my book.
Change the ending.
Oh my God, there's so many endings I want to change in so many things. An unsatisfying ending is like, I can't. I'm like, you've ruined the whole thing. I feel like books quite often do endings better than TV does, because I don't know, it's like they're more satisfying when you read them, and I feel like they're more thought out. This is very offensive to TV writers.
I think you're right, because often we see TV shows and sometimes films that have massive loopholes in them, and they almost get away with them. Whereas in books, I think is, like you said, is much more thought out process. Yeah,
I've recently watched Bloodline on Netflix,
not seen
which
that.
It's a drama, and it's really like gripping, and the characters are great and like nuanced, and the acting's really good. And when I got to the end of the final series, I was like, I'm sorry, what? That's the end? I was like,
so
is there
disappointing.
Another episode? Yeah, like you've not explained so many things, and this doesn't even make sense for the character you've created. So Bloodline is the most recent, but I would change so many endings is the answer to that question.
Game of Thrones is a common one, and someone went down Harry Potter once. Wanting that to be
the end of all the Harry Potters.
I'm sure they said they just wanted Harry to die. I can't remember.
I mean, yeah.
Well,
we were sort of promised that he'd die, and then it was like, oh no, actually he's fine. So I do get that. Sometimes I'm like, I want the main character to be killed off, because it feels like a nice resolution, but then the happy ending in me is like, oh no.
They can't kill people off these days in cinema because they want to make so many follow-ons. You know, it's terrible. Okay. What would be, if you're on your deathbed now, looking back on your career, many years down the line, what would be a highlight to you? What would success look like to you?
Being on this podcast. Is that the right answer?
Not really.
So I was asked this question the other day in an interview. Well, sort of, I was asked like what my main goals are, like what success is. And I think when I was younger, I've always had really like specific goals. Like I'll be successful if I get a book published, or I'll be successful if I go on Loose Women, or and then, you know, and obviously I've not achieved all my goals, but like 2 of those I have achieved. And then when you achieve them, instead of like rejoicing in the fact that you've achieved this thing that you've wanted for ages, you're like, what's next? So my aims now are to bring joy and be happy. So I think if I can lie on my deathbed and be like, I've had predominantly a happy life and I've been smiling for a lot of it. And if I can think of that I've made other people smile or laugh or feel less alone, or then I'll be happy.
I love that answer. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay.
But also I would like my own chat show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Halo says, how can hearing people best help the deaf community in public parties?
Great question. So last night I went to the premiere of Dungeons and Dragons, and there was a subtitled screening, which was lovely, but we were all put in a separate room. So all the deaf people were put in a separate cinema screening. So, and it's a difficult one because I love it when people try and like make an effort, and we love that. And they tried to include us by having a subtitle screening and having BSL interpreters on the red carpet, which is great. But then they also like put us away in our own little room away from everyone else. So what I would say is always try, but also speak to deaf people about what they want or what would make them feel included or what would help them. And I think that is so important, because if they'd asked me, it doesn't have to be me, it could be anyone, but you know, I would have been like, maybe don't put us in a room by ourselves, because it's a bit like keep them away from the hearing people.
I did see this on your Twitter earlier on, because you tweeted it, and I did straight away think, well, it's kind of offensive even for me who's not a deaf hearing person, because it is completely separating someone from the general community as if it is an issue, but it's not. They should accommodate them together somehow.
And it's hard, because I don't want to be like, because it is so great that they made it accessible and invited deaf people, and it wasn't like there's not like a deaf character in the film. I know they are promoting diversity as part of the marketing campaign, hence it, but so I don't want to like slate them, because they did do that, but then I can understand them having a conversation and being like, well, let's put them in a screening room, because then that can be the subtitled room, and not actually thinking, actually, if we invite people and then usher them all off to the corner, that might feel a bit weird for them.
Definitely.
So I can, I can see how it happened, but I think if they asked a deaf person, maybe they would have avoided that. So I would say helping the deaf community by speaking to us and listening to us, even though that sounds ironic because sometimes we can't hear you. But I think also at public parties, public spaces and parties, having a BSL interpreter, which is British Sign Language, but also having captioning, because not all deaf people use British Sign Language as their first language. So there are 12 million people with some form of hearing loss and deafness in the UK. So that is the UK alone, right? So that's a lot of people. That's 1 in 5. And there's about 100,000. This is approximation, because I can't remember the exact amount, that use BSL as a first language. So it is important to represent BSL, but also it's important to caption and subtitle for all those other people. And also subtitles are useful if English isn't your first language, if you're neurodivergent, you know, and you find certain situations overwhelming, for example, or you have sound sensitivity like I do, as long as with my deafness. You know, there are so many ways that captions can be useful. And then also because we hear about those ones a lot, but thinking about the setup of the space is really important. So is it in a room that it has acoustic padding?
Yeah.
So soft furnishings absorb sound. So we know this in the like kind of audio and podcasting world, because we have to like put soft furnishings all over the rooms we record in, so the sound sounds nice. But at an event, if you've got a high ceiling and that like industrial cool look, which is cool, it means that sound's going to bounce around. So if there's lots of people talking, it's going to sound even louder because all that sound is bouncing everywhere. Also having good lighting, so people like me can lip read, because I lip read as well. And things like not standing in front of a window with the sun behind you, because you're going to be silhouetted and I won't be able to read your lips. So there's just lots of little practical things that you can do. There's obviously lot more info in the book, but even something like if you're building your own restaurant or party space or bar, you can think about acoustics when you're building. So you can start it right from the beginning. But if you do have your own space or you're buying somewhere, like cushions really help, and they look nice, and curtains and sectioning off little areas is really nice. So if you have like, and that's just not just useful for deaf people as well, but if you have a little breakout quiet space where someone can go if they're feeling like overwhelmed or whatever, that's always really useful too.
Fantastic. Thanks for that question. We've got two more if we can squeeze them in quickly. Anya says, who are some of your favorite stand-up comedians?
Such a hard question. I like very varied stand-up. So I love Sarah Silverman. And she's an American comedian. I love Margaret Cho. I also like some of our UK comedians like Sarah Pascoe, Felicity Ward. I also used to love Lee Evans, like the physicality and everything. Stephen Fry, who isn't really a stand-up comedian, but I love that he can take facts and make them accessible and funny, and like that's always what I try to do with my shows about science and stuff. And then like, you know, Blackadder and all that, and obviously a bit of like Rick Mayall and Bottom because of my love of scatological humor. So a real varied mix there. But Rick Mayall actually he did the speech at my graduation from Exeter, and I was wearing a leopard print dress under my graduation robes. Of course I was. And he like made a comment like, "Oh," and I was like, "Oh my God, Rick Mayall fancies me." So, but yeah, I always thought he was great.
Yeah, Lee Evans is amazing, and Billy Connolly has always been one for me. It's just storytelling is amazing. Halo and says
Victoria Wood. Sorry, I had verbal diarrhea at Victoria. So I went to the Monty Python concert, and it turned like, this is a massive name drop, but it was an accident. We've learned about me. I didn't go as an accident, but I went, and then when I was there, I like put it on social media, and it turns out someone who'd come to see me at a stand-up gig, who I didn't know, was Eric Idle's PA.
Wow.
And she'd thought I was really funny. So then she was like, "Oh, are you at Monty Python? Do you want to come backstage?" I was like, yes. So then we went backstage, and then Victoria Wood was there, and then I had verbal diarrhea in her face because I was so excited about meeting her, and she just sort of backed away from me, and I was like, "I'm a comedian." And then she died, and I never got to show her that I can make coherent sentences. That I was sad about that, but it was nice to diarrhea in her face.
Yeah. And the last one then from Halo, thank you. What is your favorite memory from The Crown?
Oh, so in rehearsals for The Crown, I rehearsed with Jonathan Lithgow, who played Churchill. Even though I didn't have any scenes with him, we got to rehearse together. And in rehearsal, he said, that I was very funny to my face. And I was like, oh my God, Jonathan Lithgow said I was funny. And I said to him at the time, can I put that on one of my posters? And he laughed. And I was like, yeah, but seriously, like, can I put that on? And he laughed again, like he thought I was like doing a bit. And I was like, I'm genuinely asking you, Jonathan Lithgow, if I can tell other people that you think I'm funny. But yeah, working with him was great, and just like getting to meet him, and he's so charismatic and like a very I mean, so many of the actors on that show were very like giving actors. Like they would give a lot of their time to you, even though like he's Jonathan Lithgow and I'm just me. But yeah, that's one of my favorite memories.
Amazing. So before we wrap up then, Samantha, let everybody know, where can they find out more about you, and where can they get your brand new book from?
So I have a website, samanthabaines.com, and Baines is Baines. And I'm on all the social medias, particularly Instagram and Twitter. So you can follow me there. And I do very silly reaction videos to life hacks.
I've seen some of those. They're fantastic.
I got this. This is what's ridiculous about social media. I got 1.5 million views of a video of me just opening my mouth to a life hack to do with yogurt. So more people have seen my reaction to yogurt than have probably ever seen me do anything. Living with Hearing Loss and Deafness, a guide to owning it. Out on the 27th of April, 2023.
Amazing. Yeah, it's just touching on that social media aspect of talking about comedians. That's a really cool place now, like somewhere like TikTok, to find sort of upcoming comedians, because it's so accessible. I've seen some really cool, talented people on there now, and it's definitely changing the way people get found these days. Even with writing, I mean, you know, people are using it very well for writing. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been wonderful to kick the season off with you as a guest. We have the amazing Anthony Horowitz on Tuesday at 6 p.m. UK time. So please, if you can, tune into that live. It's going to be fantastic. Hopefully Chris will be back as well. But for me, thank you so much, Samantha. It's been wonderful to see you. Thank you, everyone that's tuned in and taking the time to come and see us. And stay safe and enjoy your weekend. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.